Hello, everyone. It is important that we honor, acknowledge, and respect that many of us are located on the traditional unceded territories of many Indigenous peoples of Canada. Welcome to another episode of Veg Networking Canada, where vegan plant-based companies connect and collaborate. Our special guest today is a values-based leader focused on sharing honesty, integrity, and transparency. He's on a mission to solve the dysfunctional relationship between water and cleaning products. He's a pioneer in the non-toxic and waste sustainability arenas and the founder of an award-winning, eco-friendly, conscious consumer-based business. Veg Networking Canada is pleased to introduce the founder and CEO of Live for Tomorrow, Manu Hikengabaria. Welcome, Manu.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
We're so happy
that was actually pretty good pronunciation, so thank you.
We're so happy to have you here, and we're thrilled to hear about what is the vegan plant-based origin story of Live for Tomorrow.
So in a nutshell, when I first launched the company, having come from the UK, product transparency was an issue for us in terms of cleaning and the products that were available on the shelf. So I wanted to focus very much on products that were plant-based and truly plant-based. So they were designed for us to use at home ourselves, and then it became a business from that. There's a lot of products out on the shelf that are purporting to be plant-based, and yet they still use things like tallow. Most consumers don't know that they're using tallow, which is an animal byproduct, just simply because of the names. But there's a lot of ingredients that are out on the shelf on products. So we wanted it to be natural as much as possible, plant-based because of the minerals and the ingredients that we use. But it was also critical for us to try and get vegan certification. When we went down that route, I think vegan.org was the first certifying agency that was available to get those things done. So they were still learning. I think we were one of the first brands that they certified out of the gate, and we're stuck with that. So it's been hard at times trying to find plant-based ingredients for us to utilize in our space, and we've stuck at it no matter what. And yeah, sometimes it's been quite difficult price-wise in terms of landing a finished product on the shelf.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a good point about the importance of that vegan certification to avoid potentially any of those confusion areas around the term plant-based. What does that mean? Is it solely plants? How does that go? So that's important distinction there. So is Live for Tomorrow your foray into entrepreneurship, or is there something else that sort of sparked your entrepreneurial spirit before that?
Wow. No, this is not my first foray. When I was in the UK, I had I want to say it's eco-friendly. We rented out tuxedos. So I've been in the sustainable space for quite a while. Just switched gears when I arrived here. And I switched gears here primarily because of my knowledge base and my experience. I was struggling to find actual employment that was within my field and within my capacity. Because I'd been in retail, I was being offered up a lot of junior level retail positions. Not what I wanted to do. So we took the gamble and started a CPG company with not a lot of money behind us, which was tough. But as I said, some of this was born out of the fact that we wanted to use natural products as much as possible. Having come from the UK to here, we made some significant lifestyle changes in terms of what we did and how we did those things. And one of those things was looking at eco-friendly products. And I was quite surprised that Canada was not further ahead. When we looked on the shelf and looked at a lot of the products that were available on the shelf, they all talked about being plant-based and natural and green and use all those buzzwords. But when you did the research and tried to find out what was using, often either the ingredients were missed off because there's no legislation for that here, or often the other option was that they weren't actually green. They were just, they might had some products that, ingredients that they were using that fell into the green category, and now you use that as being, that's good enough for us. So we'll just slap, that this is a natural green product. And that's still true today. Despite the fact that we've moved on, because there isn't the same standards in certainly in Canada that exists, are now creeping into the US, where you're not allowed to use certain terms and certain messaging if your brand isn't up to it. We're not being taken to task here as brand owners, which is costing us because we've got poor products on the shelf.
Isn't that such a classic entrepreneur story, right? Like, I was searching for this in my own life and I couldn't find it. And so why not me to go out there and make something happen? So that's great. And your last little bit of your comments there lead into the next question, where what are some trends in your industry? And, I'll put it out there right away. Like, there's obviously a lot of greenwashing that goes on. So maybe you want or not want to talk more about that. But the question is, what are some trends in your industry?
Well, we all know about packaging, so that's been one of the trends that we're seeing. More and more companies are talking about how they're, reducing their plastic footprint. So we've got packaging as being one, and then we've got ingredients and concentration. All of these areas are things that we focus on. So we have what we call a trifecta that we deal with when we are dealing with product development, and I'll come back to your question in a second. So we look at product concentration, how much water we use, if there is water in there. We look at the packaging, and we come at this from a reuse first. Then we go into the recyclability of packaging, and the third option is we look at the ingredients, and they all kind of meld together. So they are of equal priority. It's not just because I'm listing off packaging first that packaging is our priority. No, it's actually all three come together when we're building out products. So packaging we all know about, and I've seen probably in the last decade, the growth of bagged products, as I call them, so pouches. And every single company out there talks about how green their product is because it's now in a pouch. And it really irks me, I have to be honest. It really, really, really upsets me that people and companies are using that terminology when they know full well every single one of those pouches are multi-layered, which means that they are classified as a number 7 and they are landfill only. And yet they talk about it because of the fact that they're saying, well, it's roughly 50% less plastic material than a proper rigid container. Yeah, but at least if it's a number 2 plastic, it's got half a chance of actually trying to be recycled or reused. But a pouch is a one-time deal and it goes into landfill. So that's the first option. I mean, yes, we are looking at it ourselves, but we introduced pouches about a decade ago as a test, and we had them for a year. The retailers hated them, and they hated them because it was a single substrate, so they didn't have the rigidity that often the multi-layers had. It was a number 2 plastic. And every single retailer that we presented to loved the idea. As soon as they hit the shelf, it kind of collapsed, and they went, "Yeah, we don't like this." So yes, if the solution was to either have these bags available that were either reusable, or it was a single substrate that we could actually then put back into the stream like a number 2 plastic, then yeah, I would kind of agree with it. But whether it's a multi-layer, no, that's a really bad trend. The second trend that we still see, and it hasn't changed, is the amount of greenwashing in terms of ingredients. The number of brands that are out there talk about their ingredients being green and natural and safe for you, and yet in a lot of cases they're using sodium lauryl sulfate as being petroleum, or they're using a derivative of that, which is sodium lauryl ester sulfate or sodium lauryl ammonium sulfate, which are blends, which are petroleum blends with some plant ingredients. Most people will look at it and go, well, the company's saying it's green, so it must be good. And in Canada, there's a lot of ingredients that, you know, we allow to be used here. Whereas in the US, if you go to California, Prop 65 bans you from using certain products that are classified as being associated with cancer. So dioxin is now one of the red flags that exists in the US. And here, our government is saying, no, it's okay. It's good. You know, our average exposure to it is within acceptable levels when we look at, you know, everything that we come into contact with, but they're not looking at it from, if we consume these ingredients or if we wash with these ingredients, our actual body absorption amounts are far higher, and a lot of it is cumulative. So this bioaccumulates in our bodies, but nobody's talking about it here. And so we go out of our way to avoid ingredients that have been either known toxins. Certainly within our key standard that we work to is REACH, which is the European standard. So that's our gold standard. And then we work down from that. The US is still slightly ahead of us. But even the gap between the US and Europe is about a decade in terms of legislation. So ingredients is the other one, and then concentration. So we have, our product's been concentrated since 2015 when we launched in Target. So we were the first company within Canada to start, with the exception of one of the big CPGs, to do an 8 times concentrate. And now more and more companies are talking about how they're concentrating their products. But, you know, that's still a while to get there. And there's still a lot of, okay, they're concentrating it, but they're still using ingredients that still doesn't make any difference, you know. So what, you're taking one stab at this, but you're still using ingredients that you shouldn't really be using. So those are the big trends for us, is ingredients. We really need to have some sort of standard, and companies are still playing that greenwashing game. Packaging really should be about reusability first, and we're not really dealing with that. And I don't see, until there's government legislation, both in terms of ingredients and in terms of actually holding companies, and more importantly, the packaging industry, to account and saying, what does this really mean? I think we're just pushing this problem down the road.
Yeah.
And it's sad.
It is. There's lots of, with that said, there's so much opportunity for improvement and for the conscious consumers to know who's who in the zoo, so to speak, and vote with their dollar appropriately. And yeah, lots of opportunity for growth on lots of different fronts. So go ahead.
And if I can just add, and that's where I think if the governments aren't wishing to step up, the consumers have a role to play in this. They have to understand and educate themselves as to what that actually means. You know, when a company talks about, you know, yes, you know, we're using a bag in a cardboard box, which is better for the environment. How is it better? They should be asking them, how is it better? What are you doing with that bag? You know, if plastic bags are being banned, well, why aren't these being banned? You know, there's that disconnect of people see in one space, yes, I can do this over here, but over here it's not acceptable. Well, why not? It's the same box, same bin that it's going to. But I think the other significant part is retail actually has a significant part to stop these things ending up on the shelf to start with. And I think in a lot of companies, unfortunately, there's they do a level of due diligence, but it's all about money. Let's face it. It's all about, you know, there are a lot of smaller brands like us that are really pushing the envelope and the boundaries, and we struggle to get on shelf. We struggle because they look at us and go, well, you know, your terms aren't good enough. We're not earning enough money out of you. You're not big enough brand. But we're only going to change the things that we do by allowing smaller brands like us actually to get on shelf and make these changes. I mean, when we did the aluminium packaging, I remember we were at a trade show in the US. It was a big trade show. We had most of the CPG companies, and they're all C-level people, come up to us when we first launched, and they went, "You're nuts for doing aluminium bottles. Absolutely nuts. We cannot understand why you've done this. That was in 2015 we launched. And you look at the space now, how many companies are now doing aluminum packaging? They're not, you know, we weren't nuts then, and we're not nuts now because people are starting to get it. So, you know, from a brand point of view, we have pushed the envelope a lot. When I launched the brand in 2007, the first packaging that we had was the Avalon milk jug, and we charged $1 deposit for it. And at that time, again, I remember having conversations with retailers saying, no, we don't want to do this. This is hard work. Nobody's going to pay $1 deposit. And we don't want to take $1 deposit because it's extra work for us. And oh, and you want to pick up the bottles and reuse them? No. and you know, look at the world now. Companies are charging deposits, and packaging is being returned. It's not mainstream yet, but it's slowly getting there, which is great. But it's taken this long to get us here. And, you know, with the recent IPCC report that's come out saying how bad things are, if we don't accelerate that change, I'm concerned about the world that we leave for future generations. You know, I'm not even saying 3 generations, I'm saying even 1 generation down, possibly 2 at the most.
Yeah, you've definitely pioneered a lot of ideas in the space, and that's why it's so great to talk to you. And you're there's an urgency for the consumer to truly internalize and act upon voting with their dollar and making those decisions. And there's
absolutely
big urgency. Nobody can't rely on big for-profit corporations to sort of take bad decision making away from us, right? We have to sort of do that ourselves and fly that flag. So why don't you run us up to speed on, so the business started in 2007, here we are in 2022. So why don't you run us up to speed up until now, and then let us know, the next question is, where is Live for Tomorrow going in the future?
Wow. That is really a hard question. We've made a lot of, you know, every single time, this is probably our 3rd or 4th iteration. So yes, we're still around, we're still selling, we're still doing okay. But along the way, we've learned a lot of lessons. Our first lesson was, you know, about the whole idea about grocery retailing. I'd never done grocery retailing, so that was a real learning curve for me in terms of margins, in terms of, you know, how to get on shelf and what you have to do to stay on shelf and push the product, you know, in-store demos and coupons and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And thankfully, some of that has disappeared. But the 2 big lessons for us has been distribution. So North America still is in this antiquated model of you have to sell your product to a third party. That third party is going to take a significant chunk out of your price. Oh, and by the way, you have to pay for marketing. Oh, and by the way, you have to have a rep. Oh, and by the way, you have to broker. So when you start looking at from a brand perspective, when you're a small brand going to these companies, they just see you as, okay, we'll have you for a year or 2. If you're successful, then great. If you're not, you're done. We went through that with 3 cycles, thinking that, you know, if we switched, we would probably be in a better position. Should have learned the lesson out of the first gate, that no, this is not a model that works. And thankfully now, you know, there are platforms like Amazon out there that we can sell direct to consumer. We can sell through wholesale platforms as well. So those are certainly coming up, and they are helping smaller brands like us to stay on in the consumer space. And we're not having to pay the big listing fees. So that was the other aspect. Companies still, I mean, I remember having a conversation 2 years ago with a national retailer, and they were talking about $30,000 listing fees to just get our SKU and some product details and put it on their database. Like, which, you know, if you're a small brand or if you're a medium-sized brand, you can't afford those kind of costs. And then if you're paying distribution costs and everything else on top. So, you know, those things have got to change. So like I said, we carved out, we were in Target, we got a big opportunity with them. We wish it was a great experience. We had some things that we had no control over, and this is, you know, these are some of the big things that you learn and take away from the big retail engagements. We landed the contract just before Christmas. We had issues in terms of supply chain and trying to get raw materials in just before Christmas. Our deadline was February. The US brands that we're competing with, they had a deadline that was 3 weeks later, and we had to allow for that to just get the products through customs and into the US. Otherwise, we'd be facing big fines from Target. We learned just before Christmas, our category manager was changing, by which time we were committed to deliver, and all the finances were laid out. We paid for raw materials to come in, and this new buyer didn't want to know anything about what we were doing. So all of a sudden, this whole, you know, marketing mechanism, everything else that had been set up just disappeared overnight, and there was no recourse for us. There was no recourse for us or for the other brands. So for every single brand that was now committed financially, it was a disaster. I think we sold. We went from 100 stores that they were looking to list us to 867 stores. So we delivered every single product on time, on budget, and no issues. But they failed on their end. So the big lesson here is make sure you're able to figure all of these things out. But we learned a lot from it. You know, we learned that how to do things through EDI, through systems and processes, and to build a big volume delivery like that. But we changed our model significantly after that. We were in distribution, so we killed the whole distribution model, and we now do everything in-house. So we sell product through our own platform. We engage with retailers directly ourselves. And if a retailer comes along and says, you know, I like your product, I want it in our store, but I need you to go through, you know, company X, Y, or Z, our simple answer is sure. That's your problem to figure out, not ours. You want our brand, it comes from us, or you can get it through a third party, but you have to figure out that third party connection. We're not taking the hit on that one. So we've been very, the way we figured it out is, you know, rather than doing $1 million and because of all these, I want to say hungry mouths at the trough, because of all these different people that are involved in the process, you only make, you know, 20% margin on it. You're better off taking less in sales, but take a bigger chunk of it. And that's what we've ended up with. It's been less work for us.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we'd be remiss if we didn't say sort of the vegan Amazons of the world, you know, your Vegan Supply and your Veggie, VEJII. Those are great distribution channels as well. And
we're still trying to get on there. So we're still trying to figure out how to get onto those types of marketplaces. Some of them, I mean, I know the veggie platform that was, I think, started in BC is now in the US, and it's significantly larger. And I think it's become a bit of a beast in itself as to how do small to medium-sized brands now get listed on there.
Yeah, and you also touched on how important, we've been hearing from plenty of folks over the years, how important it is to own your brand and ensure that if a certain stream was taken away from you tomorrow, all your apples aren't in, you know, that one basket, so to speak, and how important, again, building brand is. Okay, so no right or wrong answer for our next question, Manu, but that is, does Live for Tomorrow support any charities?
Yes, so we have worked with WaterAid. That was one of our initial charities that we worked with. We are resetting that relationship, and we're now looking at some different relationships. We still continue to contribute with them, but we no longer have a actual ongoing relationship with them. Plan Canada has been one that we've done. At Christmas, instead of doing corporate gifts, we generally do gifts to them, and we pay this back in terms of messaging this to our customers. Other charities that we're looking at are more local charities. So we've worked with some local charities within the Lower Mainland, but also across Canada. So we're taking a little bit more of a let's see what's going to work. Two charities where we haven't opened the doors yet, but we are trying to figure out how it's going to work, because we're trying to tie it to our sales. As one is trees. So we're trying to see about growing, planting trees for product sales or product volume. And the other one is still continuing to do some kind of relationship with water. So I haven't named a specific charity, simply because we're now going through a little bit of a transition. WaterAid, as I said, was one of the big ones that we worked with. This was when it was still Canadian. It's now an international charity, and I think that's where it's become a little bit more of a difficult proposition, because where they were Canadian, they were okay with dealing with smaller brands. Now that they're international, it's a we're a smaller piece of what they had.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's so great talking to founders, because there's so many different right answers. There's no wrong answer to the charitable give back lens. And even just looking at your logo, yeah, it's natural to think about your give back strategy to include water, forestation, and even maybe something to do with solar and the sunlight there. But that's besides the point. So as an entrepreneur and a business owner, Manu, can you help our audience with a book, a podcast, or an app, a mobile app on your phone, or one or a mix of all, like a book, podcast, or app that has helped you in your journey since 2007 with Live for Tomorrow?
Nothing, no one book or no one podcast, unfortunately. It's kind of, I know I've spoken to a lot of other entrepreneurs, and they seem to take this sort of very much siloed approach of saying, I want to just learn about this. I subscribe to, I would say, probably about 100 newsletters that come in from all around the world. And they are, things about zero waste. They're about ingredients. They're about food. They're about housing. They're about, so it's all about sustainability in the wider scape. But there are lots and lots of books out there in terms of, entrepreneurship. You have to take what you want out of them. There is no one silver bullet in terms of all these books out there, because each one is going to be different. Your journey to building out your business and getting to where your end goal is going to be unique to you. And so something from this book or from this element will be appropriate for either a small segment, or it'll need to fit in with like 3 or 4 different other things, because unless you're building a Me Too model, which often entrepreneurs aren't, you're going to take a little bit from a lot of different sources. So when we built out, when we look at packaging or we look at ingredients, it's coming from lots and lots of different variety of sources, not only books, but also from sources. And I don't always suggest that you look at just Canadian or North American sources. Look further afield, look in Europe, look in Asia, look everywhere. You never know where that sort of light bulb moment is going to come from. And don't just look at large publications. I subscribe to some newsletters that are quite small, and yet every once in a while you'll get this sort of diamond in the rough that you can go, oh yeah, that's a great idea. A couple of days ago I was talking to somebody, and we were talking about packaging. Full circle on that one, and we were talking about why is it that plastic still is a problem and yet we're not dealing with it. And I said, well, what about using things like that were compostable or biodegradable? So we've both sort of gone down this rabbit hole for the last 3 or 4 days looking at different options. So we've been messaging back and forth and saying, what about this one and what about this one? but there are lots of sources. I have to say there's a couple of, I have to think of his name. Malcolm Gladwell has written some great books. So they all have little nuggets in there. But he's one that I have to say he's written more, in my mind, not just about big business, but it's also about little business. And so you can often find something that may apply to you in there, but there are lots and lots of writers out there. I read a lot of sustainability books. And so again, David Suzuki's written a few books. There's lots of books out there that about your particular space or that your particular field that you need to read up about, but also you need to read up about specifically your industry in terms of how you do enterprise, how do you build a business out. Marketing is one of the key areas I think most companies and most brand owners and founders really need to focus on. Without marketing, you're dead. And again, most of the stuff is online. You're not going to learn a lot of the stuff from a book because there are so many different, podcasts like this are great to listen into and pick up bits of information. But I think the probably the biggest and the best source is podcasts like this, where you're listening to other business owners who have gone through the real life challenges. It's not about necessarily an author who's writing a book and may not necessarily have built a business and dealt with the hardship of coming in every day and thinking, right, I've got to make payroll today. I've got to pay the rent today. How do I make that happen?
Yeah, and you highlight a really great point too. How wildly probably underutilized newsletters are, and it's such a convenient way for you to be in different industries and just have them land in your inbox. And if after a couple of weeks they're not providing or serving you any value, it's not an issue to unsubscribe and keep cleaning that up. But yeah, you bring up a good point about the newsletters, that's for sure. So thinking of other brands that inspire you as a leader of Live for Tomorrow, whether it's a local brand or, like you said, in Asia or Europe or something like that. Our question for you is, what are some brands that inspire your brand?
So I love the story of Patagonia. I love the story of Patagonia, more about what they do from a sustainability point of view, in that they take their items back and they repurpose them. And the other company that does that is Helly Hansen. Not only do both those companies repair their products and their merchandise within a certain time frame, they'll actually try to go out of their way to try and extend the life. So I love companies like that actually think about, somebody buys this, it has a lifespan, but can we stretch it out a little bit more? Can we find other uses for it? And then there are also companies like somebody that I met a long time ago at Expo West, David Simnick. He built out a soap company out of taking soaps that were left over in hotel rooms and making them into soaps to then sell. And he had this great concept, and he was a teacher, so he had this great concept of buy one soap and give one soap. So, for every soap that they sold, they gave one away in Africa or a third world country. So it's a great concept, and he's built a brilliant business out of that. There are lots and lots of companies that are now doing things like that. But I always love companies that are upstarts that come in and really turn the industry on its head. Unfortunately, some of them last, which is great. And then there are an awful lot that bring up a great idea to the marketplace, but unfortunately just can't make it work and disappear. But the tech and the vision and the idea remains for it to be reinvented into a version 2.0 or 3 or 4 or 5, but it then becomes something that we can live with. But as I said, big companies like Patagonia are great. Even companies like Aveda are doing great things. They're thinking about their packaging. They're thinking about, end of life. So any company that is currently talking about end of life and life cycle analysis of their products and what happens to them, I think is a great company to look at and think about, because they're laying the groundwork for our future.
Yeah, and you said it earlier, there's clearly a big inspiration for you when you see companies in this order focusing on reuse and then recycle, right? That's quite a small distinction maybe when you look at it, but it's so important to extend that life and then go into the end of life. So that's very interesting. So all right, Manu, we're at our last conversation starter, which is centered around advice. But listening to you talk today, I think it's more appropriate to sort of frame this as a question about lessons, because that word has come up quite a bit in our conversation today about the lessons that you shared and how those lessons from people who are boots on the ground are so valuable and are so important and easy to take something from and apply in one's own business. So what are some lessons or advice that you have for entrepreneurs or business owners, whether they're just starting right in the thick of things in the middle, or maybe looking at an exit or what's next?
I think the biggest lesson that I would offer up would be to go out there and ask questions from other people in the industry that you're reaching out to. That will help you to not make costly mistakes, or reduce the costly mistake you're going to make. And they might give you a spin on an idea that you may not have thought about. I remember when I first started out and I tried to reach out to companies, and I think certainly the larger companies didn't want to know, they didn't want to talk to us. But I think there are founders, there are entrepreneurs out there who are willing to share some of their knowledge. They might not want to share all of it, and I think you have to accept that. They don't want to give away their IP effectively of the model that they built out. But reach out to people and be honest with them. I get hit up on places like LinkedIn every day with people wanting to make connections, and we're all busy people. And I think where you're not genuine and honest about what is the ask, I think that's where you get rejected. So if you go in there and say, listen, this is a challenge I'm having. Can you help me? I wish somebody had been around that would help, who would have helped when we first started out, because we would have avoided a lot of the costly mistakes and a lot of the wasted time in building out the business and building out the brand. And for us, that was just something simple like, how do we get onto a grocery store shelf? And how do we stay on there? And the other aspect, and I've heard this quite a few SVI events, there was a spin-off that came out of SVI that was really targeted towards people that were going into the food space. People just hadn't simply done their simple math of saying, okay, if I now want to get on a shelf, I have to pay a rep. I have to build that into my cost. I have to build logistics into my cost. I have to build marketing into my cost. The number of business owners that go out there and say, okay, well, I'm buying this for, let's say, $10, and I'm going to sell it for $30. I'm making $20. You're not. You're actually not making $20 on that. You've got all these other things you're going to allow for. And I think that is the, if people have the opportunity to talk to business owners, I'm hoping that business owners will be honest enough and say, listen, you need to think about all these other things. But then for you to be open enough to receive that information and not sort of say, well, no, I think you're wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are the kiss of death. I think you're wrong, or I know I'm right. And so you kind of touched on three things. The advice that we kind of heard from that was a reframing of a mindset to that scarcity mindset, which is I have the world's next best idea and it needs to stay a secret, and completely kind of escaping that, moving into the collaborative abundant mindset and asking questions, being open. And then you touched on absolute gold, which is get clarity on your ask out of respect for yourself and everybody you're dealing with. So get clarity on your ask. And then we've all heard it before, and there's a reason we all hear it all the time, and that's know your numbers and how important that is. So Manu, with all of that we've discussed, is there anything in your business that is exciting, or an announcement, or anything that came up in our conversation that you'd like to touch on before we outro and let everybody know where they can find you online and on Instagram?
We have a lot of things that we're working on right now. Because of COVID, I wish we were ready to launch them. We were working on 3 or 4 new products. Supply chain issues and COVID issues have delayed every single one of those. So unfortunately, I don't have anything new to talk about other than to say, watch this space. Please visit our social media and our website as we announce new product launches. And some of that will be tied to new packaging that we're looking at. And hopefully, people who see this, I'm always open to making connections and to see how I can help other people who are looking to get into business.
Well, that sort of mentorship approach, and again, to being a values-based leader is really valuable. So thank you so much for that. And everybody else, you can find out more online, www.lftbrands.com, exactly how it sounds, lftbrands.com. And you can find out more on Instagram, a little bit more visual, not that the website isn't, but we all know how Instagram works, at LFT Products. So that's at LFT Products. Manu, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for carving out some time for Veg Networking Canada, and everybody else. We'll catch you on another episode soon. Take care.
Thanks very much.